This is Asha Saxena, your host for the AI Talk Show, where we bring in thought leaders, leaders from the industry to talk about data and AI. I'm super excited today to talk to Carl Gerber, who's been a WLDA member, our World Leaders in Data and AI member from the very beginning as a founding member, who has contributed in all aspects to the industry, to his career, and also to all the future leaders who are coming our way. Carl, welcome to the show, the AI Talk Show.
Thank you, Asha, and I'm honored to be here. And I'm really grateful for the WLDA organization. Together, we are really making a big impact on really things that matter in the digital world. And so, thank you for having me today.
And when I started the organization, my whole goal was to focus on building a community that cares about building a fair digital world with parity and equity. And I think when we talk about building the world, which is fair digital world, I think the onus goes on how we consume the data, how we curate the data, but also how the models are learning from this data. The world of AI is changing so very fast. I think it's so hard for all of us to keep up to it, from the big firms, the big tech firms launching new models constantly, to industries trying to figure out how to use these models, adopt these models, and also get the value out of these models. I get to go on a lot of conferences where I'm talking to the panelists or sharing with the attendees how organizations are leading with data. But if you really think about effectiveness of these models, effectiveness of this craze of AI, I think the very first thing that people really talk about is how do you really build these models on the foundation of data? And Carl, you've spent your entire career in the data organization. So before we get started, I would love to jump right into your career, your background, and maybe talk us through the evolution of data that you've seen.
Certainly. Well, I've had quite a journey, and it's been a fun one. I started out as a Air Force officer, and we developed an executive information system of mission readiness KPIs. And that's where I first learned my appreciation for data. And we really needed to be able to trust the data because there were very important, actual life-threatening decisions that were made based on these operational readiness KPIs to drive the Air Force. And then from there, I got into the data warehousing movement where large companies, I worked for large multinational global companies, they had these very complex data landscapes and started to bring it together from an analytics perspective in a way that it could be trusted in the data warehouse. And then, of course, we've all seen the era of big data where we discovered there were more and different types of data at large volumes moving at us very quickly to generate insights. And then now we've pivoted into we're using AI to actually better manage our data and generate insights from that data. And we're now in this era of trust where we really have to be able to trust the data that we're using with our AI. And so that's been my journey through all those kind of step changes in data and analytics. But throughout the whole journey, it's always been how do we deliver value from that data? We have to be able to trust it because once we're making key decisions and generating insights that we're sharing with others, we have to be able to stand behind it. And so that's really been the cornerstone of my career, which is dealing with these large, complex business problems and a data landscape that's very siloed in different organizations. And it's been quite an exciting journey.
Just thinking about it, I feel like you took me back to the good old days of really working with data centers or building data warehouses or building reports and dashboards. But when you think about it, really from the 3 decades I've been in the industry, I've seen how the evolution of data from storing the data to analyzing the data and building warehouses and centralizing the data to building the metadata and building the governance around it has been very important, critical. traditionally it has taken so long, right? I still remember those data warehousing project that goes for years and years and takes millions and millions of dollars, and then they're put on shelf and then redo everything again. uh, when you think about the this new era of chief data officers, who I feel that have entered in the world, and they some say that it's only 18 months stint, that's the ratio, the success ratio of CDOs, by Gartner. What is the value of CDOs, I would say, in this era? Why is that important? And how do we make sure that our chief data officers are successful? What have you seen in your career that, even though data has been important for decades, but how we use the data, especially in this fast evolving era of AI, where you can actually start seeing the result much faster? How do you feel that CDOs can stay relevant and be more successful?
Sure, Asha. I was one of the early adopter CDOs, early when not many people had the title, and our cohort was pretty small, and it has really grown since then. But I've seen several key drivers. In the early days, one of the drivers was, how do we get more efficiency? And how do we, you saw the data warehouse, and then we needed to move from efficiency and being able to just generate hundreds of analytical reports to being more effective and delivering value. And we needed to move faster. And so what ushered in the next era was moving from manually governing your data and having all these manual procedures and these silos that weren't integrated, where it took so long because you really had to depend on a group of people who knew all about the data. They were the subject matter experts, they were the data stewards. And quite frankly, it's hard to scale that. And so now, what do we have? We have the opportunity to actually scale AI by using AI to better manage the data.
That's right.
So, let me ask you this question, Asha. What are the top two ways that analysts go find the data that they need to create the insights they're trying to generate to solve a business problem? What are the top two ways?
They're looking back into their databases to figure out where the data sits, or they're hunting, they're trying to find the sources, asking, the stakeholders. So those are really the two ways. Either you go find where the data is sitting in the databases, or you go talk to the stakeholders, knocking on their door to see if they can get access to the data.
That's it exactly. You phone a friend, or you use the data you're already familiar with. But in your data landscape, how do you know that you're using the right data? How do you know what your rights are to use it? And that's where we are today. We are in the age of, we need to have well-described, quality measured data that has been inventoried in a data catalog, and it needs to be available through a data marketplace. And this is what I'm helping my clients with, is the modern data marketplace, which is built using AI for both humans and AI. We all have heard recently about Gen AI and agentic, being able to build agents. Well, if we build these really great agents, but then we take the same old approach to managing our data that we need to use them with, we're going to miss the mark. We need to have these data marketplaces that has all of this information available in labeled metadata, right to use, the quality of it, what does the community of analysts think about the data set and its relevancy. All that needs to be available to the agents as well as to the people. And this is really the big change I've seen from, we had very large data organizations with a lot of people manually finding the data they need, manually manipulating it, to, we've now curated the data using all great machine learning and AI techniques to build the data catalog. And then we make it readily available within your rights in the data marketplace. And for me, that is the real path to value here for the modern data leader.
I think uh, what you just said about marketplace, I love your question. How do you go find the data? I mean, the old traditional way, which you and I grew up in, was tedious, manual, heartbreaking because you can't find the data. And then the trust was zero because it's like redundant data, and spending so much time cleaning the data. And I would talk to my data engineers, and they would say, only if there was a tool,
Hmm.
that can magically get me all the data I want and is all clean would be so great. And now we have AI tools that could potentially help us, and help us get at least some streamlining. As you said, one solution is creating a marketplace, and getting the
Correct.
data prepped and ready for the consumer. But what I was surprised by the amount of interest in AI. I mean, everybody from the business user. I mean, we are now entering in the world where business users want AI, so they're knocking on your doors. Uh, the question, how do you prioritize that? And then you see these reports coming out in media, and McKinsey reported that only 1% of all AI projects are delivering business value, which is shocking that the business value conversation is not starting from the very beginning. Like my first question is, it's the old, the old frameworks don't die. I mean, you start, that's what I was taught when I was starting in my career. Think about the business value, start your conversation with what the success looks like. And now you see this amazing technology, which is so powerful, is only providing 1% value, which leads to the question, will organizations going to pull back their funding to AI projects if the value is not there? So the question comes, can we tame the data chaos to deliver the business value? Can we actually figure out how do we build a core, because data is the core? And if we can understand, this morning I was interviewed by another author for their book, and her question was, how do we make sure that when we bring the value, what should we be really thinking about, bringing value? And my number one thing was, it's the data you're collecting. Data, good data, bad data, and understanding what the questions are from that data. And if you don't ask the right questions from the data, and if you're not curious enough to understand what information, what data can provide the value, you will not be able to provide the value for the business. So really asking good questions from the very beginning becomes really, really critical as you think about business value. In your experience, what successes have you seen? Especially you live in the world of chaos, especially the data. You know,
Right.
the hard part. Build models will only do as good as the data performs. So how do you see this whole conversation about the business value?
As I have developed with my teams, our data strategies and now our AI and data strategies, it's very important to understand what is our organization's strategy, what are the strategic imperatives, and how do we go make money? How do we monetize this data? And actually, we don't monetize the data itself. We monetize the insights, and therefore we must really trust the data that's generating the insights. So taking that top-down approach, we really need to understand what are the things that we need to prioritize. Is it providing insights to our clients, providing insights to our consumers, providing insights to our operating committee? Um, so once you understand that, we talked about data catalogs and data marketplaces. Now you know what data to highlight, to go focus on, and to generate, and then curate it, populate it, and publish it in these marketplaces that make it available. And I also wanted to share that a mentor of mine had a really great approach that he taught me, and that was find out what are the 7 burning questions that the C-suite has. What information do they need to make better decisions, to launch new products, to enter new markets? And then once you understand those 7 burning questions, now you can work backwards and go source the data needed to drive that. And that's how you realize value early on in your data programs.
I love that, what your mentor said to you, because I think it starts from the goals. If you don't know what the business goals are, it's very hard to kind of run in the dark and try to give them and predict, or uh, just guess what the business user are looking for. I think business value really starts from understanding what the strategic goals are, and then aligning the data to that strategic goals to provide the value. I also say that quantify it. Quantify, when you think about the business value, how do you quantify and actually drill down to understand can you actually measure and create metrics around it to be able to actually go back and make sure you remind your stakeholders that this is what we are aiming for, so the expectations are aligned, and the deliverables are aligned. But I think what you really wisely said is that if you don't trust the data as a foundation, the AI wouldn't work. So when you start thinking about how do I build this trust, trust is such a important aspect of the model, because if you don't trust the model and if you start seeing the wrong results a couple of times, then you kind of adoption goes out of the window. So when you want to make sure that the AI adoption is actually effective, it is only when you can trust the data. Your experience in that.
So Asha, in building trust, there's just a few key things that you need to know. One, many people start working with the data before they truly understand what the data quality of it is. And so it's so simple today. Most of your tools have some form of a data profile available. Use it. I mean, it's been my experience that people who begin to work with data used to spend 3 days handwriting SQL just to understand the data. Well, now there's so many discovery tools that you can understand it. And when you're building your models, don't forget to understand the data you're using to train the model. Real world scenario. I was working with an organization that was building a new model, and I said, hey, look, we've got this data profiling tool. How about we help you out and we'll profile the test data that you're going to train the model on? And they said, that's great. And not knowing much about their model, we found gaps in the populations that they wanted to use to train the model with. And we said, hey, look, based on this profile, you're going to be underrepresenting certain populations. And we worked with the model makers and they said, you know what? You saved us 2 cycles on the back end where we would have had to review and analyze the output of the model to see if we were introducing bias. And in fact, without your input, we would have introduced bias. One simple step. That's a great example of operationalizing trusted data and AI frameworks. We need to go from those PowerPoints and checklists and manually going through how we're checking things to use automated means. That's how you operationalize trust. That's how you operationalize these frameworks. And just great example. And then we've also talked about how do you inventory your data? You understand the data lineage, and then you bind that to the permissible use. Is this data privacy data that you have to use or what? So once you can capture all of that type of metadata, it's at your fingertips in the data marketplace. Now you know which data sets you should be building your models from. And you also know that if you're going to train your model, if there is gaps in the data quality and representation of that data, then you can use synthetic data to fill in those gaps so you don't inadvertently introduce bias. So again, this is what I'm helping my clients with, which is to come up with these operational procedures using highly automated means, machine-centric, old school AI, which is machine learning and predictive analytics, as well as new things like Gen AI and agentic AI.
I think there are tons of frameworks that's available, but I think having a process or a framework that our listeners can adopt as they're thinking about it. But I think the core message here is to really think about, are you investing in data lineage? Do you understand there is transparency? Do you understand that can you make the data available to your stakeholders and in a marketplace in an easy manner that they can actually do their data science project becomes really critical. I think the foundation for creating data, trusted data, is critical as we think about AI deployment or AI success. I think these fundamental pieces as data leaders or AI leaders, if you recognize that, you're at least moving in that right direction of success. But when we think about data and success of the AI projects, I think the most important things becomes regulation, risk, and innovation. Of course, they talk about AI can help us become more innovative. I always say that, when you're thinking about AI is just a super tool you have in your pocket. You have this intelligent friend in your pocket who can help you, but it's really you who have to think about, am I being ethical? Am I being creative? Am I being curious? Same tool in two different people's hand can produce two different results. So how do you use this tool more effectively to stand out in your professional career? How do you use this tool to become more effective in your work environment and help your teams become more successful? But then the question comes, how do you balance regulation and risk? you know I'm working with a client right now who is working on building AI policies, and they're saying that we want to make sure that we have the AI policy that can be, used by all the different departments who are using AI. But regulation and risk is critical. When you think about what is the risk for using a technology like that, we can talk about innovation and be optimistic and see the half glass full, but we also have to be realistic and say, what, there are regulations and there are risks associated with it. How do you suggest, Carl, balancing between the compliance and the risk, and which are mandated or are exposed to these models? What are your thoughts on these leaders who have, are chartered to actually produce, but then have these boundaries?
Certainly. As I mentioned, I've been a longtime chief data officer. And one of the things I've done is I've developed those relationships with my peers, the chief risk officer, the chief privacy officer, the office of general counsel, the chief information security officer, the CIO. The list goes on and on. But we all approach protecting our data a little bit differently, but we all have the same goal, which is protecting it. And so to find that balance is to develop those relationships and understand where everyone's coming from. And then I also mentioned earlier about how we've evolved from all the manual ways we manage and govern our data to highly automated ways with that produces metadata. Well, with the metadata, you now have so many insights into the data, where it came from, how you can use it, its provenance. And that is important to balancing your risk, because now you can prove to your business sponsors, your executive committee, your board of directors, your clients, your regulators, you've got the facts. And by being able to produce those metadata reports about the information you used, and together with all the other techniques we now have around explainability and transparency of our models, we have that. Now, the other thing I always like to say is we need to balance risk with the upside. And it's really two sides of the same coin, because I just described, if we really understand our data landscape and it's cataloged and we have all this rich metadata about the data, and we can prove that we've got the controls and access is locked down, that's the same set of things we need to go find the right data. Back to our question, how do you find the data you need? I was working with a CISO, and we were doing a data catalog project, and he told me, when a breach happens, the first thing we have to do is determine what data has been accessed and how it was breached. This data catalog will help us tremendously to, one, be preventative and to make sure we've got protective controls around the data because we know all of our data assets. But two, it helps us to be more responsive in the case of a breach. And I would add to that, and also now we know what data, where the sensitive data is, and we can satisfy our internal risk folks. And then we can also know that's the same data we want to go generate insights from, so our analysts can go find the data. So I like to think of risk and the business value generation as two sides of the same coin.
I agree. And I think when you think about risk and working with CISOs, they're seeing new ways the risk or the breaches can penetrate into these models. And so the new technology comes in, and new kind of attacks are ready to happen. So how do you really get ready? And I love what you said about really be ready. Data leaders are a critical part of the CISO's team, or partnering with them to make sure that they can understand where and why this is happening. Truly, the world of data leaders is not just limited to execution, but on the other side of risk as well. So a great conversation on all aspects of data, but let's talk about real opportunity, which is operationalizing data and AI at the enterprise level. So when you think about building these applications and implementing initiatives from data organization. How do you take that from experimenting to scaling? I think this conversation keeps happening, is like, how do you scale it? I mean, it looks great when you're in your sandboxes, but really taking it, executing it large scale. And I think with your experience, large organization, of course there are pros and cons when you're working for a large organization. There are limitations and benefits, of course. But what have you seen, and what are the biggest challenges, and how do you really overcome that?
Sure. Well, one of the things that's always good to start with is understand the why.
Hmm.
Why are we doing this? Again, what business problem are we solving? That keeps us focused. The other thing I liked is you talked about experiments. And one of the things that I've seen that kind of gets in the way of scalability is proof of concepts. In this day and age, we really don't need to prove that a particular vendor software works, or the particular model works. What we need to do is we need to be agile. And so we do a series of sprints where we do the incremental pieces, deliver a little value, validate it, and then keep moving forward. And so I like to say that we move from experiment into products, and we do it, features at a time. And when you think about that, and you implement that way, you're able to scale up because you're building small increments. You've already been thinking about, how do I build this as a platform? Because again, I understand the why. The why isn't that I put together a piece of code just to do one thing. I'm really building the first iteration of a broader product on a platform. And you don't build it from day one with the huge scale. You build up to it. And so again, that's the beauty of platforms and the platform thinking that goes along with it.
I love that, because it's about taking small step to get to the bigger reach. If you don't take the small steps and you don't create small wins, it's very hard for your stakeholders to have trust in you. So it's like creating the small wins will get you to win the war. So
Mhm.
uh, really like the idea of scaling but starting small. But as we are coming to the end of this session, I want to kind of talk about the future. uh I see, yesterday, or I think it was last week, when I was talking in New York City about the evolution of data. Like, we went from mainframes to client server technology to big data to now the world of AI. The trends are changing so fast. I mean, these technology evolution took 5 to 7 years, and now it's like every 6 months there is something new that's happening. What trends are you seeing that you feel that data leaders and AI leaders should be focusing on or watching carefully?
So definitely we've talked about trust, right? But it's the how you get to the trust. And so operationalizing trust in ways that are machine centric and generate the metadata, that is definitely one of the trends, because it's expected that the models and the agents that you build are trusted, and therefore you've used the right processes to build them. But now you need to be able to demonstrate that again by the metadata that you've collected. Um, we've talked about these large, complex data landscapes. Observability across the landscapes is very important. And in fact, my teams have been building data quality and observability platforms for 10 years. And it's now taking on a new importance. You need to be able to see how data moves across the organization. As an analyst, you need to understand the quality of the data before you start generating insights from it. And so when you want to go build these data catalogs and these data marketplaces, you need to know where the data came from. That's the lineage. And so these observability platforms are able to monitor all that. And then we take observability now to the next step, is how do we observe what the AI is doing? How do we watch over the AI agents? And so now with a unified observability platform, we can measure data quality. We can see how data moves. We can see when data didn't move and react accordingly. And now we're going to be able to monitor what's going on with our AI agents. Again, all in a metadata-driven, machine-centric way. And that is the trend. Everything now is machine-centric. And yes, we still need humans. It's putting them in the proper position to be able to observe what's going on. And so they need these observability tools and platforms.
I'm very excited, Carl, about what's in store for us. I always say that what a great time for students to learn. I'm a professor at Columbia University, and a lot of times students will talk about using AI tools. And I always say that it's a great time because you don't have to worry about the answer. You don't have to memorize your theorems and scientific
Hmm.
discoveries. What you need to do is invest in time in learning about the concepts. You know, learning about why am I using gradient descent here, or why am I using the concepts, not worry about just getting the answer. So we are in the age that you can actually use AI as your tutor, as your companion. These agents are going to become powerful because they're going to help us be more successful, be more productive, be more intelligent. The question becomes that now we are in the age where humans are upgraded to a leader. Every single person is a manager of these digital human. The question is how you use them. Carl, I want to thank you so very much for coming on this, having this conversation with us, because I think all the LinkedIn Live users have this chance to reflect on their own journey. The journey is not easy, clearly, because you're working with so many diverse pieces of the puzzle. And it's not just the pieces of the puzzle, it's also within the organization, the boundaries, the red tapes. But the question is, can you use this opportunity to convert that into something bigger and better for yourself? Can you be ready to become a lifelong learner? And can you be ready to create the impact within your organization and become a better professional? As they all say, AI is going to change the workplace, the landscape of the employees. It's definitely going to change the landscape because you have to be more educated, savvy enough to be more curious, to ask the right questions, to distinguish yourself as you use this tool and become more productive. Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you, everybody who joined us for LinkedIn Live. Please stay tuned. We'll continue this conversation, bring thought leaders, industry leaders to have this conversation. And if you're interested to participate, make sure you ping us and leave a note for us in this chat. We will continue conversations, answer your questions, and spend some more time on thinking about how to create value. As we say at WILDA, leave this world a better place. Make sure that we leave a fair digital world with parity and equity. Good luck to all of you. This tool and become more productive. Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you, everybody who joined us for LinkedIn Live. Participate. Make sure you ping us and leave a note for us in this chat. We will continue conversations, answer your questions, and spend some more time on thinking about how to create value. As we say at WILDA, leave this world a better place. Make sure that we leave a fair digital world with parity and equity. Good luck to all of you.